Dorothy Lane was 63 years old, and she had flour in the creases of her hands that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. It had been there for 30 years, worked into the lines of her palms and under her fingernails like a second skin. She used to be embarrassed by it. Now she considered it proof that she had built something real with her bare hands. The bakery was called Morning Light. It sat on the corner of Elm and Fourth in a small downtown strip that most people drove past without noticing. But if you stopped, if you pushed open the glass door with the little brass bell above it, you would find the kind of place that felt like someone's kitchen. Warm air thick with cinnamon and butter, wooden shelves lined with sourdough loaves and braided challah, a glass display case full of pastries that looked like small works of art. Dorothy had started Morning Light in 1993 with $800, a rented kitchen in a church basement, and a recipe book her grandmother had written by hand in a spiral notebook. She was 33 then, married 2 years to a man named Gerald Lane, and pregnant with their first child. Gerald worked at a car dealership. He sold sedans to families and called himself a people person. In the beginning, he supported the idea of the bakery the way you support a child's drawing on the refrigerator. Isn't that nice? Good for you. Don't spend too much. But Dorothy did not treat it like a hobby. She treated it like survival. She woke at 3 a.m. to bake. She delivered orders in her own car with the baby strapped in the back seat. She knocked on the doors of every restaurant and coffee shop in a 20-mile radius until enough of them said yes. By 1998, Morning Light had its own storefront. By 2005, it had 6 employees and a wholesale contract with 3 regional grocery chains. By 2010, it was doing over $400,000 a year in revenue. Dorothy had built it loaf by loaf, customer by customer, sleepless night by sleepless night, and somewhere around 2006, Gerald started showing up. Not to help. Not to bake or clean or manage inventory. He showed up to smile. He stood behind the counter during busy hours. He shook hands with vendors. He chatted with customers and laughed his big salesman laugh. When the local newspaper did a feature on Morning Light, Gerald positioned himself next to Dorothy in the photo and said things like, "We built this together and it's a family operation." Dorothy noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing, because keeping Gerald happy was easier than fighting, and because a part of her, the part that had been raised to believe a wife should make her husband feel important, told her that sharing credit was a small price for peace. She did not realize that she was not sharing credit. She was giving it away. Chapter 2. The Diagnosis. In March of 2022, Dorothy collapsed in the bakery kitchen at 4 a.m. One moment, she was pulling trays from the oven. The next, she was on the floor, staring at the ceiling with flour dust floating in the fluorescent light above her. The diagnosis came 3 days later. Stage 2 ovarian cancer. Treatable but aggressive. Surgery followed by chemotherapy. 6 to 8 months of treatment. No working during recovery. Dorothy sat in the oncologist's office and felt something she had never felt in 63 years of living. Helplessness. She had survived poverty, a difficult marriage, the death of her mother, and the brutal early years of building a business from nothing. But she could not outwork cancer. She could not wake up earlier than it. She could not knead it into submission. Gerald drove her home from the appointment. He was quiet in the car. At a red light, he reached over and squeezed her hand and said everything was going to be fine. He said he would take care of the bakery while she recovered. He said she shouldn't worry about a thing. She wanted to believe him, so she did. The surgery happened in April. The chemotherapy began in May. By June, Dorothy could barely stand for more than 10 minutes. Her hair fell out, her weight dropped. She spent her days in bed in the small house they had lived in for 25 years, listening to the sounds of a life continuing without her, cars passing, birds in the yard, Gerald's voice on the phone in the other room, always on the phone, always behind a closed door. She told herself he was managing the bakery. She told herself the calls were with suppliers and staff. She told herself the reason he came home late smelling like perfume that was not hers was because she was paranoid and sick and not thinking clearly. She told herself a lot of things that year. None of them were true. By October, Dorothy was recovering. The chemotherapy was finished. Her scans were improving. She was weak but alive and more determined than ever to get back on her feet. One afternoon, while Gerald was out, she decided to log into the bakery's business accounts on his laptop to check on the finances. The laptop was on the kitchen table. It was unlocked. And the first thing she saw was an email thread between Gerald and a woman named Vanessa Moore. Dorothy read every message. There were hundreds of them going back 7 months to the week after her surgery. The emails were not ambiguous. They were explicit, affectionate, and detailed. Gerald and Vanessa had been seeing each other since April. Vanessa was 38. She worked at a real estate agency. She called Gerald baby, and he called her V. But the affair was not the worst part. The worst part was the business. In the email thread, Dorothy found forwarded documents. Gerald had visited a lawyer, not their family lawyer, but a new one Dorothy had never heard of, and had begun the process of transferring the bakery's business registration. He had filed paperwork listing himself as the primary operator of Morning Light. He had changed the mailing address for the business bank account to a PO. Box Dorothy did not recognize. He had applied for a new business credit card in his name alone. And in one email sent to Vanessa in August, he wrote, "Once the old bat is out of the picture, we can rebrand the whole place. I'm thinking something modern. She won't be able to fight it. She can barely get out of bed." Dorothy read that line 3 times. She read it until the words stopped looking like words and started looking like a verdict. The old bat, out of the picture. She can barely get out of bed. She closed the laptop. She sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. She did not cry. She was too angry to cry. The anger was not hot. It was cold and still and absolute. It sat in her chest like a stone. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she trusted completely, her younger sister, Ruth. Ruth arrived within the hour. She was 58, a retired paralegal who had spent her career in a family law office. She was sharp and practical, and she did not waste time on sympathy when action was needed. Dorothy showed her the emails. Ruth read them in silence, her expression hardening with each page. Then Ruth asked one question. Whose name is on the original business registration? Dorothy went to her filing cabinet in the bedroom closet. She had kept every piece of paper related to Morning Light from the very beginning because 30 years of baking had taught her that ingredients must be measured precisely and records must be kept. She pulled out the original business registration from 1993, sole proprietor Dorothy Ann Lane. She pulled out the commercial lease for the storefront signed in 1998. Tenant Dorothy Lane, doing business as Morning Light Bakery. She pulled out the business bank account opening documents. Primary account holder Dorothy Lane. Gerald's name appeared nowhere. Not on the registration. Not on the lease. Not on the bank account. He had never been a legal partner, an investor, or an employee. He had simply been there, smiling, shaking hands, and taking credit. The paperwork he had filed to transfer the business was fraudulent. He had forged Dorothy's signature on at least 2 documents. He had lied to a lawyer about his ownership stake. He had changed the bank mailing address without authorization. Ruth looked at Dorothy. He didn't just betray you, he committed fraud. You have everything you need. Dorothy nodded. Then she said she did not want revenge. She wanted her life back. Ruth called a lawyer named Grace Okoro, a woman she had worked with for years. Grace specialized in business and property disputes. Within 48 hours, Grace had reviewed every document, flagged every fraudulent filing, and drafted a plan. The plan was precise. First, freeze the business accounts Gerald had been accessing. Second, file a formal complaint about the fraudulent transfer paperwork. Third, send Gerald a legal notice revoking his access to Morning Light and all its assets. Fourth, change every lock, every password, and every account. Dorothy signed every document. She did not hesitate. Gerald came home on a Thursday evening and found the locks changed. His key didn't work. He knocked, and Dorothy opened the door. She was standing, she was dressed. She looked thin and tired, but her eyes were steady and clear. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a legal notice informing him that his access to Morning Light Bakery was permanently revoked, that the fraudulent business transfer filings had been reported to the state, that the business accounts had been frozen and resecured under Dorothy's sole control, that he had 30 days to vacate the family home, which was titled in Dorothy's name alone, purchased before the marriage with her grandmother's inheritance money. Gerald's face went through several stages. Confusion, disbelief, then a kind of sputtering outrage that she had seen many times before whenever he was caught in a lie. He said she was overreacting. He said the paperwork was just a precaution in case something happened to her. He said Vanessa was nobody, just a friend. He said Dorothy was being emotional because of the illness and the medication. Dorothy let him finish. Then she spoke. She said she had read every email. She said she had seen the forged signatures. She said she knew about the credit card, the P.O. box, the plan to rebrand and push her out. She repeated his own words back to him. Once the old bat is out of the picture. Gerald went pale. Dorothy told him she was not going to scream or beg or negotiate. She told him the bakery was hers. It was always hers. She built it with her hands while he sold cars and took credit. She told him he had 30 days to leave, and if he contested it or came near the bakery, she would file criminal fraud charges. Then she closed the door. Gerald tried to fight it for exactly 1 week. He called Dorothy's phone repeatedly. She did not answer. He showed up at the bakery. The staff, Dorothy's staff, women who had worked for her for years and never liked Gerald, told him he was not allowed inside and called the police when he refused to leave. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the case, saw the fraudulent filings and forged signatures, and advised Gerald to settle quietly before criminal charges were filed. Gerald settled. He signed away any claim to the bakery. He moved out of the house on day 22, 8 days before the deadline. Dorothy filed for divorce. It was finalized 4 months later. Gerald got nothing from the bakery because he had never legally owned any part of it. The house was Dorothy's separate property. She kept everything she had built. Vanessa disappeared from Gerald's life within weeks, once it became clear that the bakery and the house and the money were never going to be his. Gerald moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town. Dorothy heard through mutual friends that he was selling used cars again. Dorothy returned to Morning Light on a Monday morning in January. She arrived at 3 a.m. as she always had. The kitchen was dark and cool. She turned on the lights and stood in the silence for a long time. Then she tied on her apron, washed her hands, and began to bake. Her staff arrived at 5 and found trays of fresh sourdough already cooling on the racks. Maria, her longest-serving employee, hugged her and cried. Dorothy held her and said she was fine. She was home. Over the following weeks, she rebuilt. She changed the bakery's branding. Not the name, never the name, but the logo. A simple sunrise over a loaf of bread with the words Est. 1993 by Dorothy Lane underneath her name. Not we, not family operation, hers. She removed the photograph from the newspaper article that had hung on the wall for years, the one with Gerald standing beside her, smiling like he had earned something. She replaced it with the original photo from 1993, Dorothy alone in the church basement kitchen, flour on her face, a tray of rolls in her hands, smiling like she had just discovered fire. One Saturday, she hosted a gathering at the bakery for women in the neighborhood. She served coffee and fresh pastries and told her story. She told them about building something from nothing and about watching someone try to take it while she lay in a hospital bed. She told them about paper and proof and the importance of keeping your name on everything you build. She told them that trust is not a substitute for documentation, that love should never require you to become invisible, that the people who smile the widest are sometimes the ones reaching for your pockets. And she told them the lesson that had nearly cost her everything. When someone says they will take care of things for you, ask yourself this: are they protecting what is yours, or are they waiting for you to look away? A good partner holds the door open, a thief holds it shut. The women listened. Some nodded, some took notes. A young woman in the back row started her own business registration paperwork the following week. Dorothy wiped down the counter that evening after everyone had gone. The bakery was quiet. The ovens were cool. The glass case was empty except for one last croissant she had saved for herself. She poured a cup of coffee, sat at the small table by the window, and watched the streetlights come on. She was 64 now. She had survived cancer, betrayal, and a 30-year marriage to a man who never once woke up at 3:11 a.m. to help her bake. She had lost months of her life to treatment and weeks to grief. But she had not lost morning light. She had not lost her name. She bit into the croissant. It was perfect. Buttery, flaky, golden, made by her hands in her kitchen in her bakery. She smiled the small, steady smile of a woman who had come back from the dead and brought receipts. He waited for me to die so he could take what I built. I lived out of spite and took it all back with paperwork. Dorothy Lane, age 64.